In our last couple of videos, we looked at some general terms and processes for Agile methodology. Now, in the next couple of videos, we're going to look at some Jira-specific terms and what they mean inside of Jira. Let's start with issues and projects. So, what are issues in Jira? Every card or ticket is what Jira calls an issue. So if you remember from our previous video, we were looking at Agile. You remember kind of the little example of what the boards look like. Well, each of those would be an issue inside of Jira. If you're familiar with what user stories are, each user story would be an issue inside of Jira. Now, to differentiate between the different types of issues, Jira has what it calls issue types. So, for example, a user story would be an issue, an epic would be an issue, a bug is an issue, a feature request is an issue, a user contact information would be an issue, task could be an issue. Essentially, issue is a very generic term that is all-encompassing of all of these different types of issues or cards or tickets. I've heard many different names used, a lot of different tools. Like I said, Agile is not specific to Jira by any means, and different Agile tools might call it a card, it might call it a ticket. Those are some of the common ones that I've heard. Inside of Jira, everything is an issue. So what are maybe some of the different fields that you might have associated? So with a story, you might have things like due date, assignee, labels, contact. You might have first name, last name, email. A bug, you might have, what is the operating system, assignee, screenshot. You'll notice with both story and bug, assignee is on both of them. So I really want to point this out because with an issue, you can have different fields associated with different types of issues. So a user story would not have the same fields associated with a contact, but as far as Jira is concerned, they're both issues. They just have different fields associated with them. All right, so that's kind of a rundown of what issues are. What are projects? Well, a project is essentially kind of like a folder or a bucket or a category. Issues live inside of a project. Now, the project is where things like user permissions, workflows, all that kind of stuff is tied to the project. What types of issues you have inside the project, those are all tied inside of the project. So, for example, you might have a project, and you might have maybe you have multiple projects, let's say, and you have your user story. The user story is an issue or an issue type, and you can have a user story in multiple projects, right? So in the project settings is where you're going to determine what issue types you're going to have. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to create a new issue type for user story for each project, right? So maybe in one project you want to have user story, and another project you want to have user story and contact. You can do that, and then it's essentially you only have two user story or issue types in that case. So inside of Jira, every single issue has a unique key. Now, the key is made up of a project and a sequential number. This will start to make a lot more sense once we dive into Jira and you start to see this, but I want to point this out to kind of start getting your head wrapped around this, because one of the biggest things that in my experience, I've used Jira for years and years and years, and I've trained a lot of people on how to use Jira. One of the biggest things that I found people had the most difficult time wrapping their head around was the concept of issues and projects and how they work together. And so I really want to kind of start wrapping your head around this. So this would be kind of how issues and projects work together. So Demo 251. What that means is there's a project that's called demo, and then there's a sequential number. So that's the 251st issue created in the demo project. You might have one called dev. So that will be the project is dev, and then that's 821st issue inside of the dev project. You would then another one, bug, that would be another project, and 221st issue inside of that, and so on. The next one would be 222, 223. Essentially, it's just a unique way that Jira can track each one individually. Now, issues have to live in a single project. So that kind of can be a little confusing initially because you can move issues between projects. You can have as many projects as you want, so there's really no issue there. But when you move an issue between a project, what happens is the issue takes on a new properties, but then it gets a new sequential number, and everything from the previous, as far as the project properties are concerned, so things like permissions, workflows, are not associated with the issue anymore. So what that means is, let's use a little example here. Let's say that you have a project for your developers, okay? And that's called dev, and that's your project. And your permissions are that only your dev team can see it. Your marketing team cannot see that project. As soon as you take an issue and move it into your marketing team's project, your marketing team would be able to see it then because it's taking on the new project permissions. Now, one thing that's really cool about Jira is the issue keys stay unique. So when you move an issue to a new project, the old ID key is going to automatically get forward to the new one. So for example, let's say you can see there at the bottom, we have an example of a demo 251. So that was in the demo project. It was the 251st issue inside of the demo project that we created. We moved it to the dev project, and because the dev team already had 366 issues, when we moved that, it's similar to creating a new issue. That's the 367th issue. So it becomes dev 367. But if you go to the website or the URL for demo 251, if you have that bookmarked, if you have it linked anywhere, there will never be another demo 251. What happens is it will automatically forward you to dev 367. So it keeps that history intact of where you've moved the issues, and it just makes everything so much easier to find. All right, so there's a lot of stuff to cover. Feel free to go back and watch this little video again if you are not really sure how these play in. But essentially, issues are a base term for anything that you want to track inside of Jira. A lot of other tools might call it a card or a ticket, but in Jira, it's all an issue. And then projects hold those issues, and also in the project is where you're going to set things like the properties for how that issue will work inside of Jira. The permissions, the workflows being like, going from to do to in progress to complete. Maybe in another project, you're going to have to do to in progress to pending approval to complete. And we'll look at projects later on in this course, but all of that stuff is tied to the project. And then, of course, the issues are the things that have to move between those different statuses. And so the issue can take that on those permissions or properties once it moves to a new project. All right, so let's move on to our next video and take a look at some of the differences between the types of Jira that you can get.